Hi, I'm Ken Brodebay. I'm a senior consultant with Persuasion Strategies, and in this brief video I'm going to demonstrate a technique for structuring your oral voir dire. The goals of oral voir dire are, of course, to discover the unfavorable jurors who are worth striking or challenging for cause, while also getting the favorable jurors to voice some messages and themes that are good for your case, and to do so in a way that feels natural and unforced. Now let's imagine that we're conducting oral voir dire in an employment defense case. Now, one approach some attorneys will take in trying to get their themes out is to commit the panelists by asking for their agreement with the leading question. Let me ask you about a scenario. If the law and the employment agreement both say that the company has the ability to terminate or let someone go with or without a reason, just by giving that employee notice, how many of you would say, okay, that's the law, a company can do that? Okay, all right, thank you. Now, there are times when it's a good idea to ask for a commitment from your potential jurors, but the problem with relying on this approach is that you're really learning nothing about your panel. An alternate approach that is more informative is to ask panelists directly what they think about the issue. What do you think about a company's decision to terminate somebody without a reason, without any misconduct on the employee's part?
Not much. I think it's unfair. They have a family to support, and if someone's doing their job, they should be able to keep their job.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Grubb. That's definitely good to know, but the problem in using that approach to get at everyone's view is that you may not have enough time, and unfavorable jurors might end up with a lot of time to air unfavorable views. The better approach is to strategically divide the group so that you are taking note of the bad jurors while eliciting themes from the good jurors. And that is the principle. Identify the bad jurors, but talk to the good jurors. My approach for doing that involves asking an open-ended question of one of the panelists and then pivoting off that response in order to divide the group, and then following up by pulling themes from the group that you know is more favorable. It involves 5 steps: a warm-up question, an open-ended question, a pivot to divide the group, follow-up questions with the lower-risk group, and finally a wrap-up question. You start by introducing the topic and giving the jurors a chance to call their experiences and attitudes to mind. How many of you, now or at some point in your life, have ever had a job where you worked for someone else, someone who could hire or fire you? Okay. Now let me follow up with you, Ms. Welch. What was that job? What is or what was that job for you?
Well, I'm an independent consultant, but I did have a boss who could hire and fire me.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Welch. You may not be learning critical information with this question, but you are priming the pump for jurors to react to the next question by inviting them to adopt the frame of their own experience. And the next step is to ask an open-ended question. Okay, so I'm wondering what all of you think about this idea of at-will employment, the idea that a company can give notice and without having a reason, terminate an employee. Mr. Landis, what do you think about that idea? Now, at this point, they might say something that helps my case, or they might say something that hurts my case. They also might say something that I think the majority will agree with, or they might say something that I'd expect only a few panelists to agree with.
I think that employees can understandably have a hard time with that, but companies have that right to do it and make the decision what's best for them.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, that helps my employment defense case, and I'd also expect that to be a view held by a majority on the panel. So that influences the next step, which is to pivot off that answer. To identify my high-risk jurors, I want to know who disagrees with what Mr. Landis just said. Now, who disagrees with what Mr. Landis just said? Okay, thank you very much. But because they're higher-risk jurors, I just want to know who they are. I don't want to hand them a microphone to say bad things about my case. The jurors who I want to talk to are those that agree with the statement, and as long as they're in a safe majority, I won't be coaching my opponent on their strikes. Who agrees with what Mr. Landis said? Okay, all right, thank you very much. And that sets me up for stage 4, the strategic follow-up. Not just with anyone, but with those who I know are probably going to say good things. All right. Okay, and who agrees with what Mr. Landis just said? Okay. And Mrs. Long, why do you agree?
Well, it's the law, and I think an employee goes into his or her job with that understanding.
So that is good stuff for my employment defense, and all the more credible since it's coming from peers and not from the attorney. But the art to this method is how you pivot off the initial open-ended response from a panelist. Well, let's rewind to that step for a second and look at what happens if I hear something different in response to the earlier open-ended question about at-will employment.
I find it hard to understand that you could fire somebody who's been hired to do a particular job and they've been doing it well, and then all of a sudden out of the clear blue sky, you just fire them.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, in this case, that's not so good for my case, but it still serves a purpose. In this case, I'll still divide the group, still expect the majority to be on my side, still note the high-risk jurors, and follow up with those who are more favorable. Who agrees with what Ms. Campos just said? That the company really should have a reason to terminate somebody? Okay, thank you. And who disagrees with that? Okay. And let me follow up with you, Ms. Perez. Why do you disagree?
Well, if the employee and employer enter into a contract that the employer can get rid of the employee, I think it should be held legally.
Good, thank you very much. Of course, there are other scenarios, like a panelist saying something good, but possibly so good it will get him struck because it isn't a majority view. Mr. McDonald, why do you disagree with that?
Because the business has to do what it needs to do to be profitable, and behind the scenes, who knows what their actions were. They could have been whining, not doing their job all the time.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Now, if that happens, you want to tweak it a little when you pivot off that answer in order to get a majority answering in your favor. Thanks, Mr. McDonald. And in asking these questions, I want to make sure that we're clear that no one's trivializing the plaintiff's claims, and what the plaintiff is bringing to court here today is important. But I'm wondering how many of you agree with the first part of what Mr. McDonald said, that a business's first job is really to stay in business. How many of you would agree with that? Okay, and who would disagree? Okay, all right, thank you. Then you're back to taking note of the worst jurors, hopefully in a minority, while talking to the better jurors. Once you're done with the topic, it's often a good idea to wrap it up by asking a final question that gets a commitment from your panel, including the unfavorable jurors, as an antidote to any misimpressions or bad themes that might have come out in the questioning. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about at-will employment, providing the company the ability to terminate without having a reason. But I'm guessing most of you would agree that in the real world it isn't very likely that a company would terminate somebody for no reason. So how many of you would agree that most companies would still have a reason? Okay, thank you. Now that's one of the few circumstances where it's a good idea to ask a leading question, the other being when you're rehabilitating one of your own jurors to save them from the other side's cause challenge. You lead because, as a final word on the topic, you're more interested in making a point than in learning information. But for the rest of voir dire, your mission is to balance the goal of learning about the bad jurors while still having a mostly good discussion that plants the seeds of your case theme. I think the pivot does this in a way that's easy for panelists to understand and follow. That helps you build some rapport, which is another goal of effective voir dire. There's more information on this pivot approach at our blog, Persuasive Litigator. Thanks for watching.